In a world with so much plant advice out there, how do you actually know what's true? Well, in today's video, I'm going to go over 5 popular plant tips and tell you what's true and what's fake. But before we get into it, subscribe! If you haven't already, hit that button. Come on. I'll wait. Amazing. And while you're at it, ring that bell so you know every single time that I upload. And with that, let's get into today's video. Tip number 1. If you need more humidity, you should be misting your plants every day. This is fake! Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. Misting your plants every day will maybe give you humidity for about 10 minutes, but honestly, no more than that. If you really want to add humidity, you should get a humidifier. That is what they're for. Or use a propagation box, a cloche, or a greenhouse cabinet. I live in New York City, and with that means I have 0 outdoor space. I can't even get a greenhouse if I wanted. I brought the greenhouse to me indoors. I created one using an IKEA cabinet, and if you want to see how I actually did that, if that's of interest to you, comment down below. Maybe I'll make it into a dedicated video. Now, if you mist your plants every so often, that's okay. It's probably not gonna do you so much harm, so you keep doing you. But if you are misting every day, multiple times a day, I see you, that can actually cause some harm to your plants. You can be more susceptible to mold or other infections, and most of all, more pests. I mean, who wants that, right? So take it easy on the misting. Tip number 2, you shouldn't repot your plant every year. This is true. Every plant has its own requirements, and just because one of your plants is ready to repot one year doesn't mean the other one is. What if you repot your plant prematurely? Trust me, I've done it. You've done it. We've all probably done it one time in our lives, if not more. Well, prematurely repotting your plant can lead to browning leaf tips, wilting, and sometimes plant death. And we don't want that. So how can you actually tell that your plant is ready to be repot? There are actually 2 different ways that you can tell. One of those ways is looking at the top of your planter. Do you see roots wound around the very top? Do you see them poking through the soil? The second way to tell is by looking at the bottom of your planter. If you have a nursery pot, if you see roots poking through the bottom of those holes, that also means it's ready to be repot. You basically only need to repot your plants when those plants' roots have outgrown its current container. When you repot, those roots, they need to stretch out, right? And ideally grow into that new container when you go about 1 to 2 inches larger. And it's also going to have more soil nutrients to not only survive, but also thrive. Tip number 3, using the finger test to see whether or not your plant needs to be watered. This is fake. If I got $1 for every single time I heard this piece of advice, let me tell you, I would be rich. So the tip actually goes, if you stick your pointer finger, your index finger, into the soil, usually up to your first knuckle, and if there is soil sticking to your finger once you remove your finger from the soil, that means it's wet. If you remove it and there's no soil that is sticking to your finger, that means it is dry and ready for watering. This piece of advice may work for my planter on the very left because it's in a 4-inch pot. I can easily use my finger in the soil, right? But let's compare that planter to my 8-inch mama, I'd probably have to stick my entire hand in here, right? And that's because you need to check the roots about 1/2 to 2/3 down into the soil. You want to see if the soil around your plant's roots is wet, not the top. So what do you do if you've got a huge plant and you can't necessarily use the finger test? Well, you can get a moisture meter, which is my favorite tool. All you do is stick it into the soil about 1/2 to 2/3 deep, and it'll tell you whether your soil is moist, wet, or dry. That way, you don't need to get your hands dirty. Tip number 4, adding rocks to the bottom of a planter to increase drainage. This is fake. And if you have a planter with rocks or pebbles at the very bottom underneath soil, I need you to listen up. Adding rocks to the bottom of your planter doesn't work. It actually does the opposite. Rocks at the bottom of your planter will actually slow the drainage, and it will make your soil likely to become waterlogged, decrease drainage, and potentially give your plant root rot. Not good, not good. Let's get into the science behind why. I'm gonna do my best to explain this. I had to do a bit of reading, so forgive me, but I will link down below a couple of articles I found that actually discusses this. The 2 concepts that you need to know is number 1, capillary action. This is how your roots absorb water from the bottom up. Number 2, gravity. Without any soil on top of it, right? How does water flow through to the bottom of a container that has rocks? Well, it uses gravity. In a planter, if I have rocks at the very bottom of that planter and soil in my plant on top, as I'm top watering the plants, the soil, those roots are performing bottom up absorption. So that means the likelihood of water getting to the rocks is probably slim, and so slim that gravity isn't necessarily able to do its thing. So what actually happens, and how does water get down below? The soil absorbs excess water, becomes waterlogged, and only then does that water use gravity to fall down into the rocks. Essentially, they cancel each other out. It creates this vicious cycle. Next time, just opt for a planter with drainage holes. It'll save you time, money, and most of all, heartache. And finally, tip number 5, fertilize your plants. This is true. This one is very important. And of course, I saved the best for last. Imagine when you were a kid, you were having your growth spurts. If you didn't eat additional nutrients, some say drinking lots of milk, would you have grown the amount that you have? Probably not. Well, similar to us, plants also have that going on. We may have a growth spurt during our childhood, but plants, they have that every year during growing season, which is spring and summer. So during this time, you're gonna want to give your plants additional nutrients. Pepper in some of that fertilizer. There are so many different ways that you can fertilize. I'm going to talk about 2 that I've used throughout my years of plant momhood. You can use liquid fertilizer such as Miracle Grow. All you need to do is dilute that by half or even more in water, especially if you're going to be feeding your plant a couple times a month. The second way that you can fertilize is by using a slow release fertilizer, something of organic material. I specifically use earthworm castings. At the beginning of the growing season, we'll sprinkle about 1 inch of a layer on top of all of my plants. Do a little bit of a mixy with that topsoil and then water whenever needed. And this works by slowly releasing nutrients into your soil every single time you water. That way, you don't need to remember the last time you fertilized and which plant. You do it once, you set it, you forget it, and you just go. There you have it. Those are 5 popular plant tips, and hopefully you learned something a little interesting. Were there ones that you were surprised about? Conversely, were there ones that you were like, I knew it, didn't need you to tell me? Well, comment below, I'd love to know. And if you liked today's video, hit that like button, come on, give me some thumbs up. And if you want to see more of these videos, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so you know every single time I post. And with that, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you so much for spending it with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!